Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar. The webinar is presented by CME Online. CME Online has been approved by the Council on Podiatric Medical Education as a provider of continuing education units for podiatrists. Today's activity has been approved for 1 credit. A couple of housekeeping items. On your screen there's a control panel with an orange arrow. By clicking on the orange arrow, you're able to open and close the control panel. When you open the control panel, you see a box for questions. If you have any questions, please type them into that box, and we'll try to answer all of them in the time allowed. And I'd like to introduce now Dr. David Friedman, who's going to be presenting FASMA news, notes, and compliance. Dr. Friedman.
Thank you, Michael, and everyone, welcome to our new platform for CME Online. And this is for all our FASMA information that we like to disseminate every other month. So I want to just dive into the importance of the registration process. So, let me go through this because there was an issue with some people not registering properly. So going forward, please understand that when you register, we get a registration and it shows your name, your email, the date and time you registered, and then an NPI number. All doctors on this webinar need to put their NPI number. So when you look at your email will look like this for registering. At the bottom, it says NPI only for doctors. Most of our doctors didn't pay attention and do the NPI only part. The regular staff, please do not put any numbers in there. It's only for the doctors. But it's critical that you put your NPI number in here, as these CME Online webinars will be providing you with 1 hour of CME, which you'll receive a certificate once you complete the course and take the test at the end of the webinar. The test at the end of the webinar, you must score a 7 out of 10 or 70% or better to get the CME credit. So you can see that the vast majority of the docs missed as we go down the list here. So the most important thing again is please provide the NPI number, because CME Online makes it important that they can match up your NPI number with you as a doctor so you get your CME credit. So you can see a lot of docs miss that. All right, well, let's jump back into the webinar, and we'll move forward from here. Part of the presentation process of being on CME Online, I have to relate that I have my disclosures, and for this I have no conflicts of interest. There's no off-label use of any drugs being discussed or any products that are discussed in this presentation. FASMA news and notes, as you know, we've been doing this for the last about 5 years, and it's important that we do this 60-minute session every other month so that we disseminate information to all doctors and staff, and it's very important that everyone participates. The upcoming dates, just so that you remember, the next one will be September 5, which is a Thursday. The next one after that will be November 14th. And then, of course, I'll pick a January date as soon as I get a chance to look at a calendar. I'm currently out of the area. I'm in Salt Lake City at the APMA meeting. Obviously, being remote sometimes makes things a little more difficult, but I was able to get on and be here today. As you all know, we have the Coding Resource Center access. Everyone in FASMA should be using this. This is your critical resource guide that we use for all your CPT, HCPCS, ICD-10 codes, Medicare policies that you can access anytime by just going to the APMA Coding RC website. Again, our user ID is FASMA in caps, and the password is GUDE1600 with a capital G at the front. If they ask for the secret word, it's Rockville. Still use the ICD-10 help site periodically. Sometimes it's easy to get an ICD-10 code from here. And if you want to use that, the login is FASMA, and the password is F@SMA2015, as it shows here on the screen. You have to do that twice for login reasons for security. Just do that, and you'll be able to access any of the ICD-10 information. We've now done 49 webinars, and if you missed one, you've missed very important information. Any of the previous webinars can be obtained and accessed. The previous ones were on a different GoToWebinar platform for this year, and all the previous ones prior to that to January are archived in our G Drive on the FASMA website. So today's webinar objectives I'd like to talk about today. We're going to actually review our MIPS SCG outcomes data for our orthotics, AFOs, and prostheses. Aetna issues that we wanted to review because the billing staff had found some issues with modifier 25. About the DEA, about calling you. Discussing our DME pneumatic boots and potentially the Accord brace. Why x-rays are important, the same and similar review that was positive and what we can disseminate for information there. And E&M, the need to review the medical history, HPI, review the system, things like that. So we'll be touching on all these different areas today in today's webinar. I want to show you some data that we've been collecting. We started collecting data for our orthotics, both ankle, foot, and for the partial foot prostheses back in 2017. You can clearly see here from the screen that the SEG2, which is the AFO data, had a count of 1,135 in 2017, with 920 meeting the performance. That was an 81% performance rate. And then there was a performance not being met in about 19% because people did not do the secondary rapid health indicator or was never documented. The SEG3 is the foot orthotic data, and the SEG5 is the partial foot prosthesis data. This is also from 2017. You'll see that for the foot orthoses, we only had 657 reported and only 18 measured for the partial foot prosthesis in 2017. We needed a minimum of 20 for the SEG5 measure, so we didn't have enough for that. These are quality measures. These are very critical in the world of MIPS and also for FASMA to show whether our AFOs and our foot orthotics and partial foot prostheses are medically appropriate and necessary and whether patients are doing well with them. In this graph here, it's going to show you the information comparing 2017 to 2018 data. Clearly, you'll see the 2018 data is in orange and the 2017 data is in blue. So you'll see that things flipped with the SEG3 versus SEG02. So AFOs and foot orthotics is important to have high, outcomes that we're looking for. Obviously, nothing's going to be perfect, but certainly the goal is to have good outcomes. So if we look at things relative to each year, we saw the SEG2, we had a 4% increase, where the SEG3, we saw a slightly decrease in 9%. Now, let me go into each one and discuss these different diagnosis codes and things like that, because it becomes very critical to understand what the diagnoses were relevant to the actual measures. So the SEG2 here for ankle foot orthosis, the first one is plantar fasciitis. So we saw that with the patients who were counted in this measure, 71% of the patients saw significant improvement by us doing the measure in in the RHI indicator. So if you do an RHI the first time, you can do the patient when you dispense the device, and then do the rapid health indicator when the patient comes back 30 days or later. Then we have the ability to gather this data. The M76, 822, and 821 is posterior tibial tendinitis. You'll see that we had a 58.5% improvement for significant improvement on those patients. So clearly something's up with the ankle foot orthosis related to PT tendinitis. The next one was perineal tendinitis. We only saw 38% improvement on patients with perineal tendinitis. And then we had the next one was Achilles tendinitis for these patients, and was 46.73% saw a significant improvement. So what are the factors that are causing us to get low numbers potentially for these patients? So start with number one. We have to have enough people getting these services reported. So if you don't do the rapid health indicator in the first time go around, we lose that patient in the database. So it's critical that whenever any DME is given out, that you have to do the rapid health indicator. The second thing is that the patient must be seen 30 days or more. If the patient's seen in 30 days and they haven't had a very nice improvement, it may take another 2 or 3 weeks. You don't have to do it on that date. Do it on the next visit, because you're going to see the patient back maybe 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks later, then do the second rapid health indicator. It's critical that you do the rapid health indicator because we need it, but you always want to do it on the second time, potentially when the patient's had improvement. Obviously, some patients won't get better. We realize that, but the vast majority of our patients should. So these numbers reflect low numbers, which concerns when you see this raw data. Foot orthoses, how does that look? Well, these same diagnoses codes were also pulled out for foot orthotics. So you'll see for plantar fasciitis patients, we had a very nice number of 78%. Patients saw significant improvement. For the patients who had the posterior tibial tendonitis for M76, 822, and 821, we see an 87.5%. And then we see for M76.72 for peroneal tendonitis, we're seeing that the patients had a good improvement of 100%. There's only 5 of those reported. And then we have the M76.62 for Achilles tendonitis, left and right. We saw 94.74%. But if you look at the total number of patients that are being pulled out of the 2018 data, it's still pretty low. So clearly, we know we're doing a lot more DME in FASMA world, and clearly a lot of the practitioners on this call aren't doing their job, which is simply just whenever you dispense a DME item that's either an AFO or foot orthotic, that you clearly go to the RHI, Rapid Health Indicator, do the initial assessment, and make sure that you go through that very carefully. It's very important that we have a lot of data for this, because the more data points we have, then we can be more realistic when we go to a payer and sit down with them, or anyone that wants to say, are foot orthotics important to patients for their outcomes to have good results or reduce their symptoms or resolve their problems. So the data here is important. The data is here telling that people are helping in some places. Some people are doing it more than others. It's critical that all of us as the doctors participate in this. So I just wanted to make this and impress upon everyone that we need to get this done so that we can even potentially publish data, because none of this data exists out there regarding foot orthotics and ankle foot orthotics. So just take this to heart. Please be more mindful of this. This is one of the most important things that you can do for us from the data collection standpoint. So any DME needs these rapid health indicators initially when the first item is dispensed, and then it has to be associated with an office visit. And then the second one will be when they're seen later on with another office visit down the road after the dispensing of the device. Let's go into now another part of this, which is the Aetna denying established patients with E&M and Modifier 25. Modifier 25 means that there's a separate, distinct, significant evaluation and management service. So in order to be paid for that, we have to be able to make sure that if we're billing this with a minor procedure, that there's something significant about the evaluation and management. And what a lot of doctors are not doing is, yes, you are evaluating the patient, but you're not medically managing the patient. M stands for medically managing the patient. And it's very critical that we do a lot better with medical management. So with the minor procedure, such an injection, an nail avulsion, lesion destruction, a strapping, whatever, if the patient had a prior visit procedure done with a short period of time, Aetna is recognizing this and saying, hey, this patient had a new patient visit, a strapping, now they're coming back 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, and they're getting an E&M and a strapping at the same visit. They're recognizing that even though the rules of E&M say you can have the same diagnosis and bill the same minor procedure with the E&M, what is significant about what you're medically managing the patient? Because when push comes to shove, we have to be able to look at the note under your plan, under the patient instructions in GE, and say, hey, the doctor said they're medically managing the patient this way, and oh, by the way, they also did a strapping, or oh, by the way, they also had to do an injection, because these things are critical, and that's why we designed the GE templating system so that all the strappings, injections should fall to the bottom of the page when you select the proper templating. So again, it's very important that if you're going to do a follow-up visit, if you're going to do an E&M and do a procedure, you got to make sure that your medical documentation clearly delineates that there's a medical part of the note and then there's a procedural part of the note, and they're separate and distinct and not together. So here's an example that we saw with one of the patients for Aetna. The patient was a new patient. They had a strapping done the first time. They see the patient again for follow-up in the bill, the established patient visit with the strapping again. Aetna denies the E&M and only pays them the strapping. What's the problem with that? Well, you and I know that you get paid less for the strapping than you do for the E&M visit. So now we have to try to appeal this. And if the note is very wishy-washy on separating out the evaluation and the medical management side, then the problem is that the strapping is now paid for, which is at a lower paying rate. So if you're going to have a push to shove issue, then it's better just to bill the E&M visit for a visit. I just think you have to be very careful with how you medically manage the patient, document the medical management of the patient. Otherwise, what happens is it puts us at risk in these audits or these reviews where they ask for the medical records and they say, this is the same note they did the previous visit. Nothing's new, nothing's different. You got to remember, if you're using a copy and paste type of follow-up visit and you're just forwarding information, they clearly see the writing, the forest through the trees. They know that you didn't do anything different on that visit. So, the auditors are not stupid. They see these things very easily. Some more issues we've come across recently has to do with foot care. And they're doing random denials with multiple foot care charges, meaning if you're doing the 11,720 and 11,05556. So we just got to keep an eye on that and make sure we're getting paid for this stuff. We do recognize the XS and the 59 modifiers, so we're not having problems with that. We did find out that there's some issues with Aetna when it comes to total contact casts. If you're applying more than 3 in a 90-day period, 2, 9, 4, 4, 5, be aware that they will most likely deny the 4th total contact cast. Then we can appeal it. The documentation must be pristine that it was medically necessary. Clearly, if the patient's doing better and they just had a very severe ulceration and they've had 1 cast, 2 casts, 3 casts, now they're having a 4th cast within 3-month period, which is possible, you got to make sure that you're documenting this really well. This came up recently. I'm sure some of you may have received an email or heard about this. This just happened, in the month of June, that there was actually a scam targeting doctors who have DEA numbers. Just like the IRS never calls you, neither does the DEA. If the DEA wants you or doesn't like you, they're going to come guns a-blazing, knocking down a door, and they'll be have guns pointing at everyone. So the DEA doesn't call you. If someone calls and says they're from the DEA, clearly that's a scam. So be aware of things like this. We know that happens with emails now. It happens also with telephone calls to offices. We did a review from our clinical workflow committee recently to see about which DME items are not being used very much in FASMA or which ones are being used inappropriately. We came across that the L1906 multi-ligamentous ankle brace was mostly not being used appropriately or was being billed incorrectly for the braces that are being used. Patients are really getting an L1902 or an L1971. So we're pulling out that code. Also, we're pulling out the L4387, the non-pneumatic walking boot we dispense, obviously immobilizing boots for our patients. You should be documenting the patient has swelling or edema, because clearly if the patient has an injury, they're always going to have swelling and edema. And therefore, you're using a pneumatic walking boot to help reduce the swelling and edema in the foot, ankle, lower leg, and the code would be L4361. Photography. One of the doctors asked recently again about photography. I know we've covered this before, but I thought it's important to see some new ways that you can input photography. So this was a case where the doctor said that Dr. Siddiqui wanted, or our pathology, wanted to know more about the patient's status, seeing visually what it was, so that maybe they can write an article or a paper or use it also in their diagnostic aspect. And remember, we have to use something and know what's HIPAA compliant. We can't just send things from a text or an email very easily. So we want to do things with what? Traditional camera using a SD card. You then can import this into a patient images screen on your server in your office and then share it with the doctor. Or what I've started doing recently in my office is using our TigerView because you can take images and actually import them right into TigerView. So how does it work? Basically, if you have a folder or whatever on a desktop, you just put the patient's information there temporarily from that card that you just used, or you just take it right from the card. You then look up a patient that you want to put it in, and then you just click the import button at the bottom of the screen there. By clicking the import, you can put not only the x-rays, you can put any images in here, you can put your ultrasound images in here, and obviously you can put your ulcer images in here. So when the patient's ulcers are opened up, you can look at multiple views together, you can look at single views together, so you can kind of compare different things. And this is one of the patients I used for showing this and demonstrating this. So this is pretty cool. It's very easy to do. The new TigerView 8, it makes it really simple to import these images. So everyone should be that has TigerView should be getting this made available to them. If not, just ask me. I'll explain and walk you through this. But TigerView 8 makes it so much easier just to import pictures like this right into the patient's record into their TigerView folder. I've harped on this before. I think it's very important to review this again. We get a lot of patients with musculoskeletal symptoms in FASMA world, and I can't tell you how many times we review patients' cases that we audit, and the patient has an MSK problem that's never been seen before, or there's an MSK problem that's brand new, and the patient has heel pain. Believe it or not, this is taken from the Podiatry Management magazine, so I'll give the credit to them. There's actually a calcaneal fracture. So I thought that would be enough to hammer home this information, let alone, here comes David Friedman. I see a patient on June 18th this year, and sure enough, if you look at the calcaneal spur, it fractured inferiorly. So the patients will have other reasons for having heel pain, and this is just one example where musculoskeletal symptoms sometimes pose as soft tissue problems when they're in fact they are not. Again, I can't tell you how many times that we do an audit, and within the audit we have problems where the doctor doesn't do a musculoskeletal exam, and if they go to another doctor and something like this happens where they see this, that is not standard of care to not take the x-ray of that patient's foot. So it's very important, and I know there may be some offices that we don't have access to an x-ray in the office. Then you send the patient out and you get the x-ray and you get the x-ray report and also get a copy of the images. Certainly the radiologists read things pretty well, but there are times when they miss things. It's important for you to review the report with the actual images to concur with the interpretation that the radiologist has done, because you may see some things in there that the radiologist didn't show. So I just thought this would be very interesting to show this, because it's very important to know that musculoskeletal problems present sometimes only as soft tissue, when in fact they are bony problems, and then there are problems where the patient actually has a fracture or something else. In this case, this patient was immobilized in a pneumatic boot because of this fractured calcaneal spur. Let's go through our DME and just update same and similar. As you can imagine, we've been working hard at this to try to get a lot of our same and similar items overturned on appeal. We're doing better with this because the documentation has gotten better. It's very hard to win appeals when the auditors just automatically rubber stamp something. We have some auditors that we've dealt with that automatically always deny our claims. We have some other auditors that are at least reasonable and will take into account the circumstances, why the patient lost the item, was it damage or whatever, that really made it relevant that the patient needed a new device. So here's an example about a patient, for the reason of irreparably damaged. We were told previously that probably won't pay for this unless literally it's destroyed in like a catastrophic event, like a hurricane or a flood or something like that. But here's an example where the doctor did a great job documenting this. So I'll give accolades to our doctor. They just wrote the former walking boot was very worn out. Patient indicated was not smooth along the plantar surface or plantar aspect. The beneficiary was concerned that they would slip and fall when wearing the device. So it was worn out. And this actually was a reason for the patient winning the appeal for the same and similar item. Because again, currently, as we know it, all DME with Medicare at least, that they have a 5-year shelf life. We know it's not relevant or really realistic that that's as appropriate to do that, but that's what CMS has. And until they change it, which hopefully will happen within maybe the next year, but until they do, we're stuck with this. So it's very important that if we have to appeal something, if we have a statement like this in your medical record, that gives us at least the reason for why the patient needed this device that was replacing the previous device that was not appropriate, that could have hurt or harmed the patient. And you can say that in your note. You can say the previous device is so worn out that it's going to make the patient slip and fall, could harm them, and it's totally contradictory to the reason why that they need the new device. They needed to be mobilized to prevent further injury to the part that they're trying to heal. So there's ways to go around doing this, and it's just important to try to think of ways that help the patients. So same and similar, if you are interested in looking up reasons of denials that we have won and also seeing denials we have lost, we actually have where the shared with me option in your Google Drive. You just click on or type in same or similar, and you should see the one that Fong created. It's called same or similar AFO dispensing documentation tips. And we've gone in there and we add more information in there as more claims go through appeal process. So it's very easy for you to use your Google Docs to see information there that may give you some idea of what may make something covered when it's not. Remember that every patient that we give a DME item needs to get approved for delivery with the ABN sign for them. So this is critical, especially for our Medicare patients, but also for our private patients. By having them sign that, at least we have a record that they received it. The patient can never say they never received it. They can also never say they won't have to pay for it because they're signing that document which says they will pay for it. Also on the proof of delivery, and we have the reasons for why the item need to be covered, because it's a new item that's considered an AFO when they've had a previous one in the past 5 years. So it's very critical for you to view that document as we're dispensing these items and make sure our staff is properly circling things when appropriate. I want to touch upon E&M a little bit because that has come up as an issue in the offices, especially with review of systems. We've been seeing a lot of people leaving off review of systems, so I just want to make a comment about that. The type of E&M we do is mostly 99202 and 99203 visits for new patients. As you can see here, you have to do at least one for 99202. 99203 is 2. I've always professed in our FASMA world to always get 2 review of systems and 4 HPI in every patient if you can do that. And the reason is that at least the history component would potentially be appropriate to go up to a level 3. So it's very important to try to do that. You can also see that you get credit for past family surgical social history in a 3 visit, but it's not necessary in a 2 visit. So you could do it, but it doesn't give you any credit, technically. If you do your exam and it's very limited, like it is here with 6 bullets for the 99202, that's great. For 99203, you need technically 12 bullets in 2 systems. And the last part is the diagnosis, data, and risk. You need 2 of the 3 areas to meet the criteria for the diagnosis, data, and risk. So this is your medical decision-making columns. And a lot of docs fail or forget about medical decision-making and the critical things that we see. So where I see where a lot of our doctors like to say, I discussed all the alternatives, the risks, the complications with the patient today, period. And that's all you see. So that's like minimum. That's like nothing. That doesn't help you. You have to discuss the risks. So risks with something have to be spelled out. So it would be, I discussed with the patient today the potential that they could have recurrence, that they may have an infection, they may have a blood clot, they may have a loss of foot, leg, or light. Whatever the reason may be to increase the risk potential, that helps you. If you're reviewing data that day, so if you're reviewing x-rays, that elevates the level of medical decision-making. And of course, the amount of diagnosis. So if the patient has multiple chief complaints, they're gonna have multiple diagnoses to go along with that. So the diagnosis should work back to match what the HPI went with the chief complaints. And if you have multiple diagnoses, it's easy to get to the limited part because it's multiple diagnosis to get to a level 3 visit. Let's go to an established patient visit. So this can be for anyone who is an established patient but has an initial or subsequent problem. So in ICD-10 world, you can have an established patient that has a new problem. The new problem is the initial problem. If you see them for any subsequent visits, that established patient is a subsequent visit. So it's important to remember that an established patient can be both either an initial or subsequent visit. And those are the reasons we have those in the GE form for you. Now, looking at the history, present illness, and the review of systems, this is very important because you'll see that for a level 2 visit and a level 3 visit, it's the same. You only technically need 1 HPI and 1 review of systems for a 2 and a 3. But yet again, we see some of our reviews and audits that there's no review of systems done for our patients. So once you don't have a review of systems, it creates a problem for this. Now, the review of systems is something that the patient technically gives you. It's not something you're doing. It's not part of your exam. They're giving you the information. You're then putting it into the specific systems. You'll see the level 4 visit is 4, 2, and 1. It exactly mirrors the same thing as the 99203. So if you build 99203s, you should build some 99214s based on having 4 HPI, 2 review assistants, 1 past family surgical or social history. You'll see that the exam component is the exact same thing in a level 4 visit, 99214, 12 and 2 visit, as the 99203 is 12 and 2. The difference is in the medical decision-making and the counseling. You'll see that the diagnosis, the data, and the risk, it's limited, limited, low, but you'll see in a 4, it's more multiple, moderate, and moderate. So it's possible that you can get a level 4 visit because your medical decision making is more complex. So you may have an established patient that has multiple diagnoses, you reviewed different data, or the risk may be high based on the treatment that you're providing them. You know, are you ordering them blood work that day? Are you sending out some lab work? So these are things that are becoming important that are part of the data and the risk for the patient that a lot of docs fail to realize. So understand that when auditors outside of FASMA, you know, we're doing our own internal audits. The outside auditing people will look at the medical decision making, and they'll look to see how well you wrote your medical decision making. How thorough were you? Were you copy and pasting things from one visit to the next? Because once you start doing that, it looks the same. That creates problems for your subsequent visits to having any credibility with an auditor. So we try to find those things and we relate these to you in audits to help make sure that we're doing the right thing and getting the right things done so we're billing appropriately. So let's go through some E&M facts just to kind of go through things again. So based on E&M, we know that nothing's changed yet. We know that in 2021, currently there's talk about revamping the E&M system for office and outpatient visits. So the 99202 and 203s and the 99212s, 3s and 4s, et cetera, those may change in 2021. There's still a lot of talk going out there. There's nothing been finalized yet, but the rules may change. They may lax a lot of the rules for like the chief complaint, the HPI, the review system. They may relax a lot of the exam component, but the most important thing they're not going to relax is the medical decision making. So it's going to be critical that that's there. Currently, the way things work, the E&M requires a review of systems. So the review of systems requires not a lot. I see almost everyone that's newer to FASMA likes to put 20 review of systems. You don't need 20 review of systems. We only need maybe 2, okay? If you want to do 3 or 4, go for it. Great. It's all relevant to what is pertinent to the patient's review systems that day. So you'll see in a level 2 and a 3 visit, you only need 1, and a level 4 visit, you need a 2 for the established patient. And for the 99202, you need 1, and the 99203, you need 2. So it's relevant to the patient's visit that day, and you only need to document the pertinent ones. Sometimes there's pertinent negatives. For example, if the patient's being provided an NSAID, you'll definitely want to put in there whether the patient has any problems with heartburn, stomach upset, nausea, whatever. You can click yes or no on those where they admit them or deny them. And the bottom line is that your MA can do this for you to update that stuff, but you as a doctor must ultimately review it to make sure that it was entered correctly because you're signing off on the record. It's all about you ultimately, not what the medical assistant put in there. So it's very important to verify before you sign that record that we had at least a couple review systems in there. Again, if we do 4 HPI and 2 review systems with most patients, we'll probably hit the mark where we'll never have an issue with auditing. New patients and existing patients that have not been in for 3 years or more are considered new patients. So you do need to have the patients fill out their forms and re-update their medical history and review systems. So ultimately, for medical legal reasons, we have to review the forms. So if we have a form in front of us, we should at least initial, date it, and say it was reviewed, and make sure you did review it if you did say reviewed. Because obviously, if it doesn't match up to what you put in the GE record someday, that can come back to bite you in the butt. So you don't want that to happen. The next thing is anything that we do that we receive that's a piece of paper that we actually review, like an MRI or a PT report or a vascular report. If that's a paper report that you're getting, you should be initializing it, dating it, and saying you reviewed it as well. These things give you extra credit, you know, when malpractice occurs because they show that you hand wrote it, that you actually did review it. So these things do help you and defend you in those situations. For most cases, obviously some things can go negatively, but for the most part, these are important things that you do. From our compliance aspect, we try to make the forms, you know, available for our staff to put them in and follow the GE format. Obviously, the important thing is that it's put in appropriately and that the staff has to periodically do some random checking of the scanning they're doing. So whatever scanning system we're using today, tomorrow, next year, because these things can change, the bottom line is that the documents have to be scanned and put into GE. If they're not scanned and put in GE, it's a problem. So we do have to periodically make sure that those review systems that the patient filled out and signed are there. You know, if the patient hands back a form and it's blank, you have to look at them, if your staff didn't do it, and say, Mrs. Jones, you know, you obviously have a problem. That's why you're here today. can you just look at this real quick under the foot section or under the skin exam or whatever? Can you tell me the things that are bothering you today? So those review of systems technically are supposed to come from the patient when it comes to a doctor's office. So it's very, again, important to relate the review of systems. You just check off the things that are relevant for the evaluation of management services. If you're doing no E&M that day, and let me repeat, if you're doing no E&M that day, you don't have to do a review of systems. You don't have to update the medical history unless there's something relevant that's new that you need to put in the medical history. Because what you're doing with the procedure, you've already generated everything previously for the patient, and you have it already in the data. You just say, we have this here in the data, is anything changed? You can read back to them what's in the record, and they say, no, everything is the same. Then you check off, it's been reviewed and nothing's changed. And we have those boxes for you in the patient's history. I want to make sure that we want to be compliant. We meet our E&M documentation. That's why I put up those basic charts for E&M for everyone. I think it's important for everyone to take time just to think about these things a little better as they're going through and doing their notes per day. We're all very rushed to get things done, but it ultimately comes back on us as a doctor because we have to provide a good note that's good medical necessity. So remember, E&M stands for evaluation and management, where the M, the management, really stands for medical management. If you're going to do a surgical procedure, that then takes it outside the E&M world because then you're doing a surgical procedure. The question came in, am I doing a Winograd or a wedge resection? So I want to make sure that doctors understand if they're doing the cold steel procedure, which is a Winograd, taking a scalpel and cutting out part of the nail and the skin, that's a matrixectomy. That's CPT 11750. However, if all the doctor's doing is taking a wedge of skin, maybe the hyperlabium of the nail, you're just doing 11765. You're not removing toenail, you're removing skin. That's not a nail procedure. So there's a difference between this. And I just wanted to show you an example. This I took from Rick Lamry's Foot and Ankle Surgery 4th edition. You can see here diagramming where the nail skin is overgrowing on the medial and lateral sides. It's drawn out with the marking pen and the scribe. You can see being excised here, the skin, and then of course it's sutured up when you're done. So that is a Winograd. That's where the nail and the skin is excised. If only the skin is excised, then it's just a wedge resection. So it's important to know that that exists. Just came up with writing Medicare Novitas. If any docs are doing any adjacent tissue transfers, these are CPT codes 14301 and 14302. They listed that they are reviewing these codes very closely. They feel podiatry should not be doing them very extensively. The 14302 is an add-on code. It never requires modifier 59 or XS because add-on codes just mean more square centimeters. But this is about transferring tissue. So what Novitas has said is when it's performed by a podiatrist, they will suspend the case for review if the medical records are sent with the claim, meaning this type of claim would have to go by paper with your operative report. If you don't submit this with the operative report, then what will happen is they will deny the service. And then it becomes important that the operative report, of course, was scanned into GE so that we can send this to them for redetermination of the denial. Clearly, they will then pay for the service as long as it shows medical necessity. So they say that, you know, if the documentation supports the CPT code that's billed, then they'll pay for it. But they don't think that podiatrists should be performing these a lot. They think it should be in rare instances. So because it's supposed to be a rare thing, it should be sent with a operative report and a paper billing for this specific CPT code for the advancement of tissue 14301 and 14302. Another thing popped up recently about the LCDs. The Novitas people put into their LCD specific vascular diagnosis codes. Now, if anyone knows this and reads these things, you'll know that the vascular codes are supposed to be not asterisk diagnoses. So once they put these diagnoses and mark them with an asterisk, the problem is that these I-80 and I-87 diagnosis codes would require a date last seen for any at-risk foot care for patients that we see in Novitas, not for those in Palmetto. So the important point here that I want to make, whether this is Novitas or Palmetto area, is that the LCDs for those allow you for other diagnosis codes where you don't have to have the date last seen. It's not important. So we have diagnosis codes like I-73 as an example with .9, which is the PVD unspecified. So here's an example in GE where we have it, and you just click the button under the PVD unspecified, or you can pick the other specified PVD. And if you do, we have the two diagnoses that are possible options. So the I-73.9 and I-73.89, and those two codes aren't considered non-asterisk diagnosis in both payer policies. So whether it's Novitas or Palmetto, those diagnosis codes should help you get there. And you don't have to worry about the date last seen so much. But otherwise, the date last seen is needed with any asterisk diagnosis, which is typically a systemic diagnosis. So that we're talking about your diabetes patients usually, and potentially those other diagnoses I just showed you, the I-80 and I-87 diagnosis with Novitas. Okay, so before we get to the Q&A, I just want to jump into some other areas here just today on GE. So give me a second to jump in, because usually this takes a second. So let me get in here. All right. All right. So I was trying to bring this up before, and it's been a while since I wasn't here earlier. So we'll pull up GE. There we go. So if you see this, by the way, it says, please complete the subsequent rapid health indicator form. That pop-up means you're supposed to go down and complete that rapid health indicator. So the follow-up visit needs to be completed. And again, if you feel like the patient has not hit the 30% more of improvement, so if the score here, this total score is always out of 70 total, that's very important that that score is being calculated properly. So we need to make sure that if it's 35, 40, 50, whatever, great. And then that's an initial one, but the follow-up one, you want it to be maybe about 20 or 10 or 15. If you're not hitting those numbers, and maybe it's better to wait another month before you do the second rapid health indicator. Also down here is our assessment. So this is your doctor objective feeling of what the patient's visit has gone from and to. So if they start at a 4 and now they're down to a 2 or down to a 1, that's a great improvement. So more than 30%, that shows it there. So we've got to make sure that the data points are being done. So you're not filling in the data down here and filling in the data up here. It doesn't help us, it hurts us. So I want to just go into the review of systems part again. Again, you don't need to fill out every one of these. You can instruct the staff that. So if they know what the patient's coming in for that day, pick out the 2, 3, or 4 that are important. So the typically most common areas that we're going to be doing, again, is skin, which I'm on right now, musculoskeletal, and you don't have to click on every one of these. It may just be that one is appropriate. And then, of course, neurological, if there's something relevant here. If it's not numbness, tingling, or burning, and it's just numbness, you can just say admits numbness, and the staff can do this too, and that automatically puts that in. The other areas, again, gastrointestinal, heartburn, nausea, if they're going to prescribe an NSAID, I would always see whether the patient has that or not. So if they don't, great reason to prescribe that medicine. The last one's cardiovascular. Maybe you want to use one of these for swollen feet or legs there. So there's over 5 reviews. So you don't need a ton of them. You only need 2 potentially, but more is great. If you want to do all 5 of these, great. But I don't think you need to do the other ones unless they're relevant to the patient's visit that day. So just want to kind of reiterate review of systems with you on the call. All right. So at this point in time, let me just jump out of this screen and jump back here. On the far right side, I know we have questions that can be asked on the side. If anyone has any questions about today's webinar, this is a great opportunity to provide questions. So there's a question and there's also a chat box. Okay, with no questions being asked, I will then proceed. We'll end the webinar, and we will go ahead and usually within 30 seconds to a minute, the webinar should pop up with the Q&A questions. Please go ahead and answer the questions. If you don't get it, there should be a reminder email that comes to you by tomorrow that says to make sure you've done the questions. So that should do it. Michael, anything else? Yes.
We have 2 questions.
We have 2 questions. Okay.
This total contact cast readout really is not standard of care. It needs to be addressed. It cannot stay on for more than a week. It's always medically necessary until closed.
Where is that question thing? So it was about total contact cast, and I didn't catch the rest of the question.
It seems to indicate that total contact casts cannot stay on for more than a week, and total contact casts are always medically necessary until the ulcer is closed.
So you continue treating.
Hold on.
You can.
The doctor wants to be unmuted, so you might be asking. Hold on 1 second.
So let's see here. Dr. Trito wants to ask a question. Let's bring him up. Let's see where Michael is.
You got me? Can you hear me?
You got him? Yep, we got you, Mike. Go ahead.
All right. So my point there with the question about the total contact cast is that we just, from a company standpoint, we need to address this with Aetna because they're clearly out of line with saying you can only put on 3 casts in 90 days. That's not even remotely close to the standard of care. And leaving somebody in the total contact cast with a wound for 3 weeks at a time is you're gonna just wind up calling pica. So that's just not even appropriate what they're doing there. The other question that I had, you had mentioned if we get documents in that come in that we're supposed to be initialing and signing. My understanding is there's 2 ways to route that document, either to be signed or already signed. So I'm assuming if you initial it, then it doesn't have to be routed to my desktop. But if it comes in and I don't initial it, as long as it's routed to my desktop to be signed, that's the same thing as initial it because it's an electronic signature. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct, Mike. That would work too. Yep. Thank you.
Just a clarification there. Thanks.
Yep.
That's it.
All right. That's it. All right. Anyone else on the call want to ask a question?
Okay, next question. What CPT code would be used when dispensing a pneumatic walking boot for treatment of a soft tissue injury which tracks edema?
So a pneumatic walking boot is a HCPCS code. It wouldn't be a CPT code. And the pneumatic walking boot is always L4361. Clearly, if there was an E&M done in addition to that, then you would build the CPT code for the evaluation and management service for the established patient if it's established, or a new patient visit if it's a new patient. So that's the code for a pneumatic walking boot.
Okay, we have another question. What is the difference of the 2 different codes for ankle braces?
For which 2 codes? The ones that we put on there before, the L1902 and L1906? We took a look at an L1906, that's called a multiligamentous ankle brace. An L1902 is considered a ankle gauntlet. And an L1971 is a prefabricated AFO device that you have to actually make sure you fit it to the patient appropriately. The Accord brace is one of the braces that would fall into that as an L1971, so it's a very good stabilizing foot and ankle brace, but it goes up the leg. In order to be billed as an L1971, the piece that goes up the leg into the calf area has to be attached to the patient when it's dispensed to them in order to get the proper fit for the patient.
Okay, next question. Which is the best code for air step ankle brace?
For the air step? So if my memory serves me correct. Sorry? So if we're talking about the air, like the air ankle brace from so it depends on, there's different names for the different air cast braces from DJO. So sometimes it's hard to answer on a call like this without seeing the actual brace. So it depends on the actual brace. And a lot of things that we use are either L1902s or L4350. So it just depends on which brace it is. So there has to be like which specific model that we would need to know so I could tell you the code. So offline, I can tell you if you want to email me, give me the exact model of the DJO brace, and I can then let everyone know what the question is more. We can narrow down the HCPCS code to this brace that you're talking about in the question.
Okay, Dr. Masternick is coming back and saying the air step is L4350. I think you have to correct the number, guys. L4350.
I'm sorry, Mike didn't catch the rest of that.
Dr. Messenger says the air store is L4350.
L4350 for an air step. That's the question?
That's a piece of statement, it looks like.
So, the hard part is, I'm going to say most likely that's probably correct, but the bottom line is that, again, you have to look at the exact type of brace that it is, because they also make a PTD brace, which is not L4350. So it just depends on which brace it is. So it's hard to say without seeing the actual brace or seeing the model, that I can visually put my eyes on it. So I would say, yes, that may be correct, but I can't do it over this call today. Because an L4350 just says an ankle controller throws to stirrup style, rigid, includes any type of interface, pneumatic, gel, prefabricated, off the shelf. That's what it says. So I'd have to look to see what the exact model is, and I can look and see what the PDAC has, and the PDAC dictates usually what type of brace you can bill it at. I know sometimes they'll put on the dispensing box or the sleeve that goes around the device, they'll put down the code that they feel it should be under, or they got PDAC approval for. We just have to verify it.
Okay, another question. Are you now saying that L1906 is no longer available for use?
So is it available to use? Yes, it is. Are we going to be using it in FASMA? No, we're not going to be using it, because we did the study to see what the utilization was and which codes people were using, and it was just something that's not being used so much. So you're going to be using it either in L1902 or L1971. So look at the options for that. I'll be more than happy to talk about it more offline too, if you're not sure which that is. But we do have options for that. So the L1971 is the Accord brace, and L1902 could be a DJO air support ankle type of device. So it just depends on the braces that are out there. And I know we're trying to pare down the number of DME items that we use and how many DME vendors that we use. So it's very important that we use high quality stuff, but that does the job, and we don't want to bill it inappropriately, because a lot of people are billing L1906 probably inappropriately.
Okay, at this point, there are not any more questions.
Okay, so this is the end of the webinar for this time again, and like I said, the next webinar will be in September. So that date again is September 5th, and please plan to be on the call by about 4:50 so we can get this started appropriately on time for 5 o'clock. Again, remember that the webinar Q&A ends at the conclusion of the webinar today. Thank you, everyone, for attending.